You know, there are many Hall of Fames. And the thing is, there is the most important Hall of Fame, and you can be in it. Now we have the NBA Hall of Fame, we have the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, we have the NFL Hall of Fame, we have the NHL Hall of Fame, but none compare to the Bible's Hall of Fame, which is the Hall of Faith. Now, with these other Hall of Fames, what are the requirements? Well, you have to have say hold numerous records. You have to be consistent, along with longevity, and also famous. You have to be famous. Now I know with some people, they're in the Hall of Fame because they're not famous, but that's an anomaly of the word Hall of Fame being instituted by some of these sports institutions. Now, the way I see it, because many things in society has been derived or taken from or even stolen from things in the Bible. Because think about it. Chapter 11 of Hebrews is called the Hall of Faith. So man got that from Hebrews chapter 11 and made it into the Hall of Fame. But with the Lord, again, when you want to be in his Hall of Faith, or if you want to say Hall of Fame, but it's his Hall of Faith, you want to be in his Hall of Faith, there doesn't have to be numerous records. And you don't have to be voted in. So let me give you some of the requirements in being in God's Hall of Faith. Now, the Bible speaks of people we've read about, we know of. And there are many examples. But I'm going to tell you some of these requirements. First one, and in no particular order, give an offering of your best. And that would be, and the example would be Abel. Number two, living a godly life in the presence of evil. That would be Enoch. Having a godly fear. That would be Noah. Showing strong obedience. That would be Abraham. Enduring belief. That would be Sarah. Being a blessing to others. That would be Isaac. Being a worshiper. That would be Jacob. Making a proclamation to God, which means to make public, meaning have no shame. That would be Joseph. Choosing a big picture over the present. That would be Moses. Sometimes you have to go outside of the box of normal thoughts. And that would be that would be Gideon in the walls of Jericho. And the last one I have is doing the right thing while the world says otherwise, even in the midst of your wrongdoing. And that's Rahab the prostitute. So those are the requirements of God's Hall of Faith. Now I'm going to give you the insights of each one. By faith, Abel worshiped God based on God's standards and expectations. He offered shed blood as a sacrifice rather than just giving him something his own hands had produced. He offered God his best and was approved as a righteous man. In fact, even though he is dead, murdered by his brother, Abel's faith still speaks. It teaches us that access to God's presence is through the blood. That's the kind of legacy you want to leave. You want your life of faith to be a testimony to others, to point them to the truth. Then there's Enoch. Is one of only two people who did not experience death, and Elijah is the other one. And that he pleased God. That doesn't mean, of course, that if you're pleasing God, you won't die, but it does mean that his departure from the world was a direct result of how he lived. He lived a godly life within the context of an evil and corrupt society. And what he did mattered. And you must operate in faith even if you have to do it alone. And go against the accepted norms of the day. You must believe with the expectation that God responds regarding his will for your life when you seek to please him. Then we have Noah. Noah was warned about what was not seen yet. He was motivated by godly fear. He couldn't even conceive of the flood God was going to bring on the earth. Nevertheless, Noah took God seriously and acted on what he said. Just consider the obstacles he faced. There was a 120-year gap between God's command to build the ark and the flood. Noah was instructed to build a tremendously huge boat on dry land. Everyone who saw it, no doubt, called him crazy. But Noah believed God and obeyed, even though when he had been asked to do didn't make any sense at all, because it had never rained a drop of water up until that point. And thus he became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. Abraham made a pilgrimage of faith. God called he obeyed. Now that sounds simple until you realize that Abraham did not know where he was going. And how many of us can do that? And how did he do it? How did he live as a foreigner in the land of promise without ever owning it? The answer is that he had his heart set on another city, one whose architect and builder is God. He focused on the spiritual while looking for the physical. See, often in life, you won't know where God is taking you, and if you overlook the spiritual, you become discouraged. God is the architect of the eternal city, and he's the architect of the opportunities in your life. Then we have Sarah. She is an example of the power of God in a person's life. She was unable to have children, and Abraham was as good as dead in terms of ability to procreate. In fact, Hebrews only gives us the conclusion to the couple's infertility story. When God promised her a child, Sarah laughed. She thought it was a joke. Eventually, though, she had faith that the one who had promised was faithful. And it took 25 years to get the promise to come to fruition, which was a baby. And oftentimes, God doesn't complete what he wants to do in your life until you're spiritually prepared. So, in other words, the longer we take to get on board with God, the longer our situation that he has promised us that we're looking for will come to fruition. Let's see. After years of waiting, Abraham received his son Isaac. Thus, the promise was fulfilled and testing began. God told him to sacrifice Isaac, the very son, though, when Abraham was to become the father of a nation. And make no mistake, in one way or another, God will test how much you love him. Do you love the gift or the giver more? And that's a situation that many of us have to deal with and realize. Is it the gift or the giver? So how did Abraham cope when it seemed like God's command contradicted his promise? He considered that God was able to raise the dead. And why would he think that? Because Sarah was barren and Abraham was as good as dead. Nevertheless, it is God who gives life, and he had a promise to keep. Don't forget what God did for you yesterday. The situation you face may be different than anything you've experienced before, but God is the same. The receiving back of Isaac is an illustration of the same type of divine intervention that God's people can expect today if they live by faith. Here's some more. By faith, Isaac blessed his sons concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed his grandsons while he worshiped. By faith, Joseph, near the end of his life, told the Israelites to bury his bones in the promised land when they got there. And again about Moses. By faith, he left Egypt, instituted the Passover, and crossed the Red Sea. Why? Because he was looking ahead for the reward. He considered suffering, reproach for the sake of Christ, to be greater than wealth. The walls of Jericho, they fell as a result, or it fell as a result of the most bizarre military strategy enacted in history. And as a result of her willingness to align with God's people, Rahab, the prostitute, the lowest of the low, got recognized alongside Abraham and Moses as a hero in the Hall of Faith. How can these things be? Well, it's simple. God tells us, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, declares the Lord. Then, like a preacher, let's see. So, there you have it. Do you desire to be in God's Hall of Fame, which is the Hall of Faith? And don't think that you're not up here because you've read in the Bible of the people of the Bible and you put them on a higher plateau. They were normal people just like you and I. But because of their faith in God, they were able to achieve greatness and thus being in or named in God's Hall of Fame, which is the Hall of Faith. So what is your desire? What is your grand outlook? What is your overall point in life? Do you want to be in the will of God? Do you want to be one of the greats? And in this situation, it's not a selfish thing. It's not a selfish thing. Because here's how we have to look at things. Do you want a little bit of God and say, oh, I just made it in? Or do you want all of God, as much as you can get? See, this is when it's not a sin to be selfish. This is when it's not a sin to want as much as you can. This is when you say, I want all of God. I want all of God more than I can take in. Because that's what he wants to hear. That's what he wants to hear. And when you have that type of attitude, when you have that type of frame set, it pleases him. It pleases him to say, give me all that you have. Don't hold back on anything. Praise the Lord. Enough said.